talk with you, a police commissioner, former chair, something that I'm usually only allowed to do in organized town meetings. So it's great to go back and forth and talk about not only what's going on in the nation, but some of our perspectives on these things. So I look forward to chatting over the next few minutes.
Sure, very good. Me too. So I guess one of the terms that is often associated with policing is protect and serve. And right now it's being questioned by many. Can you discuss the meaning and its role in community policing?
So that's a great question. Yeah, protect and serve is something we've actually heard since the early 50s, which was brought on by the LA Police Department. There was a contest actually in LA, I think 1959, to find a catchphrase or a slogan. And it was through the police academy that some cadets came up with that slogan. And as we know, it's been coined throughout the nation. You see it plastered on the sides of so many police cars. But it's really the mission of every department to protect and serve. I think what you're asking really is, how does an agency get there? You know, what are the keys to success? And that's what people are questioning today. What drives the success of a department? I always told the officers that came under my command that I used to say police work is people work. And what I mean by that is people judge law enforcement by the last contact they have with an officer. So if you are on the West Coast and have a negative exchange with an officer on a traffic stop, or maybe a seatbelt checkpoint, or maybe you have contact in a retail store and it's a negative contact, that's going to be reflective of the next time you're stopped, maybe here in Connecticut. It's kind of that already preloaded idea of what law enforcement is like. So I always believe that we need to treat people with the utmost respect. Respect is actually an officer safety issue, because if we mistreat or come off in the most arrogant way with someone, and it leaves them with a bad taste of the exchange with police, it's going to affect the next officer they have contact with. So I always remind officers that came under my command, we used to sit and talk about expectations. Police work is people work. And, you know, it's important that we treat people fairly. So when we talk about protect and serve, it reminds me of the oath that every officer in this nation take. And it's similar no matter what state you're in. And, you know, the oath is essentially, I solemnly swear to uphold and execute the duties of the office, yada, 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 for the state wherever you are. But what's key in that oath for every single officer is the line, "and will to the best of my ability." To the best of my ability. And sometimes that gets lost in law enforcement, especially when officers have many years on the job and are not as engaged. So when we talk about protect and serve, we can really flip the coin on its other end and say it really means to the best of our ability. So I think if we break down protect and serve, we can actually put it into two categories. The first category is protect. And what does protect mean? And this is universal for every police department in the nation, federal, state, local. What does protect mean? It means that you have the physical ability to perform with your firearm, defensive tactics, to protect, arrest and control techniques, emergency driving, for example, critical thinking. Okay, these are all aspects of how we protect the people in our community, all right? And being capable in performing those particular acts to the standard that is equal to what the police academy expects of you, all right? And then we talk about serve, and we can put serve in a different category. Serve is more about interpersonal communication, how we treat one another, how we roll out the service that we have, showing empathy, showing compassion. Service is also leadership. You know, I always believed when someone called the police and they're in a dire situation, it's almost like an angel arrives when they see a police car pull up in their driveway.
Right.
Okay? And I've always believed that. Some think not so much, but I always believe it. It's like an angel showed up to solve the problem that's existing right now. As simple as I remember my wife once called because she came home and found the alarm going off. And she called me at work and I was on the job, and they sent the local police officer to, not the town I serve in. And the truth behold, it wasn't our house alarm. It was an alarm clock that was going on upstairs in an upper bedroom. And she was too scared to go in because she didn't recognize the sound. But it was a buzzing or a beeping.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that, the officer shows up, takes the leadership role to go into the house, find out what it is, and it's something as benign as a clock, but has the empathy to understand where she's coming from.
Sure.
And that's what we need, rather than dismissing people
Right.
and making them feel silly. Serve also means integrity, knowing you're doing the right thing, whether anyone's looking or not. Okay, that's important. And one thing that I think is very important with the definition of serve is having the proper mindset. And the mindset being that you're there to serve the officers and the community to the highest standard possible. Okay, which goes back to the oath, circling back to, we'll do it to the best of our ability. So that's the definition of protective serve. Most importantly, it needs to be the mission or the mission statement of every department. And that mission, and here's the important part, in my opinion, needs to be driven by the chief. And if it's driven by the chief, then it is carried out every day. And if that mission is lacking, or if that passed down or making things happen the way the chief wants it with any clear direction is lacking, then you're going to have some derailments with officers on the job. So not only is it protective serve, but the chief, the CEO of the department, needs to push that mission down every day. And I will say the question is, what does it mean? And it's being asked about community policing today more than ever. Personally, in 2020, the bus is leaving. And if you're an officer and you're not getting on it, you're going to be left behind. And if you're going to be left behind, you very well may be out of a job. So
right, absolutely, and I think one of the things that you're as you're describing this, it's like a culture, establishing a culture within the department. And as you mentioned, from the chief on down, the culture has to be there. Because when I became a commissioner, almost close to a little bit over 20 years ago, I had joined the commission at the time that there was a lot of turmoil within the department that was existing at the time, and it was a disconnect between the management, the executive officers, and the officers. And it was clearly evident as we would see things filter out into how they perform their duties, and no clear direction. So ultimately that changed within a short period of time. There was a new chief brought in, the other chief retired, and the other officers, the executive officers, eventually retired. But you saw that transition, but it took a few years for the transition really to happen, and for the culture to be there where everyone trusted the management group and they weren't, at odds with them. It didn't happen overnight. So when something like that is in place, it's great. But I saw it both sides. I saw it when it wasn't there and how it affected the group. So it's definitely important.
To your point, just to wrap up what you were just saying, in my estimation of and what I've seen personally, the chief needs to be there. The chief needs to be on time, there at 7 a.m. or 8 o'clock, whatever his shift starts, and stay throughout the day. Now, of course, there's meetings and there's events that he needs to go to, but when you're noticeably not there, why should I care? Why should I show up at 3 o'clock and give everything that I'm supposed to give? I got 2 years on the job and the chief's not here. It's not said, it's an unspoken message, but it's important. It's an important message, especially when they're absent.
And that's exactly one of the things, one of the issues was that nobody knew what the chief was and what he was doing at the time. And we stepped up our commission meetings. We actually started the whole 2 meetings a month. And then we requested from the chief an actual schedule, a time schedule, which really sent him over the top. He went over the cliff on that one, but it was all in public meetings that this was discussed. So it was just something that was one of the things that was brought up. And you're right, you have to be the leader and show by example, and that's what people are looking for.
Right. Great.
So, I have another question. So currently, national conversation is a lot has been talked about and centering around police legitimacy. Can you define the term and talk a little bit about what it means to gain legitimacy as a police department?
Yeah, so that's a great question, because police legitimacy comes up in the media quite often, and it's not the media that created it. It's actually a term that came about in about 2014, 2015. So very simply, in the most simplest term, police legitimacy equals trust, okay? And is the core of community policing. What I mean by trust is it's measured by the degree of the public's cooperation with you to solve crime. So as we know, there are many cities that are not on the side of the police, so they're not engaged with the mission to solve crime. But if you have a community that admires law enforcement and works with law enforcement and helps them solve crimes, especially inner city crime, could be the suburbs where you're doing it through social media and putting out messages as to how we something we're currently investigating, and you get feedback by email. However you do it, you're building trust with the community. That's police legitimacy. And to go back in time, when I mentioned about 2014, 2015. So when Obama was in office, there was a task force he began called the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing. And this was in the wake of the Michael Brown shooting and all the unrest out in the Midwest, and how it was really telescoping across the country. And this commission came up with 6 pillars. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on each pillar, but I just want to touch on them because they are very important concepts in law enforcement today, which everyone on this Zoom call has heard about. So the first pillar was building trust and legitimacy. And how you do that is you have a complaint system that, believe it or not, is welcoming to the public, okay? Forms are available in your front lobby. They're not hidden behind the sergeant's desk. They're handed out to anyone who asks for it. I can be a third party or a relative of someone, and I should have access to the form. That's building trust. The form is bilingual, so people don't take it home and struggle to figure out how to fill it out, okay? And that a complaint process is timelined and deadlined, so that when you receive the complaint at your agency, there are specific steps as to who reads it, and then maybe it reaches the chief's office or the deputy chief's office, gets disseminated to the investigative arm, whoever that is, and that there's a deadline to respond to the community or to the complaint, okay? So police legitimacy and trust is built through, one part being a complaint system, and 2, having a timeline and saying, hey, not only did I hear from my local police department, it's still in process, but I heard something. And there's nothing worse than all of us in the community, even dealing with personal issues at our home and not hearing back from someone. So that's just an example of trust and legitimacy. Policy and oversight, civilian review boards. Some departments in this day and age do not have a civilian police commission. And the recommendation is that every department should have a civilian police commission. Someone from the outside that is not sworn, that can look at matters and give advice and advise how the department should approach. Of course, usually they are also advised by corporate counsel, someone who's an attorney from the town, but someone that's civilian in a board of 3, 4, maybe 6 or 7 to sit and listen to issues, current issues are very important. The next policy and oversight issue is accreditation, getting your department accredited, meaning that its policies and procedures meet the national standard of an accreditation association. Okay. Another pillar is community policing, and we can get there by using neighborhood meetings, having block watch associations. And in our town, we were doing business watch associations by connecting with the businesses in the major hubs of downtown and north end of our town in Fairfield, and having a email alert system when there was some type of scam or business problem going on. So even neighborhood or business type of block watch association is that type of crime reduction, community policing that President's 21st report came out on. Lastly is training. Getting officers trained in crisis intervention. Not every agency has a crisis intervention team. Fairfield happened to have one. That means they're on-duty officers that are responding to routine calls, but have that extra 40 hours of training in how to deal with people suffering from some type of mental illness or someone that's having a crisis, to have a third officer on the scene that can help diffuse those. Training in the way of bias training. And training in the way of advancing your own degree. You know, does your department have funding to get a bachelor's? Does the town pay for you to get your master's, which is very rare? I was able to work in a town and very privileged to work in a town where your bachelor's degree is paid for if you pursue it. So there's always a push, and the recommendation back in 2015 was to advance training. Okay. And lastly is the officer safety and wellness arm of the president's task force recommendation, that officers are always trained on safety mindset. They approach every situation with their safety in mind and the safety of others, and that they're mentally and physically keeping themselves well. Whether that means there's a program that they have to check in with the department on their level of mental fitness or physical fitness, or just the fact that there are people like ambassadors out there within your agency that are promoting fitness. And I can tell you, from the time I came on in 1986 to the time I retired in 2018, 90% of the department today is really physically fit. And I think because they see the images of other officers and they want to join and be part of that. So there is a big trend to stay fit and stay healthy, because it reduces injuries, and it also promotes a good mindset. So just to touch on transparency when we talk back about police legitimacy, here's some really easy ways that a department can be more transparent, and it costs nothing to do. I can speak from personal experience, because our agency would do neighborhood meetings when someone simply said, hey, I've got a local car break-in problem in my neighborhood, and I've got 5 or 4, as few as 3 neighborhoods that want to sit down for coffee and talk to the chief. We would make time on a calendar to come over and talk. Great way of building rapport. Coffee with a Cop is a national program that I brought into Fairfield. Standing in a restaurant with a pot of coffee, no cost to anyone, no agenda. People get to come up and have a coffee and say nothing at all, talk about sports, talk about some potholes on their street. It's a great way to improve transparency. And one more I'll touch just for the sake of time: Citizens Police Academy. Having a program where civilians can sign up from your community and spend 12 weeks, 1 night a week in your agency, learning the inner workings of your agency, from its detective bureau, its investigative branch, patrol, the patrol systems, our 911 systems, how we train in firearms, when we train. It's a great educational tool, and it also puts people on the side of the police. So those are examples of how you build legitimacy and build trust.
Yeah, and we did some of those in Brookfield. We did the Coffee with a Cop, Special Olympics, Tip a Cop. We've done the Stuff a Cruiser.
Yeah.
Now is up to half a tractor trailer, I think. But by the time they collected the Christmas presents last year, they had to truck them to the hospital. But yeah, they're very effective, and you know, it's a good place just like that to stand around and chat with the officers, and it's a good time of year in you know, the spirit of Christmas. So people are coming and, you know, freely donating things and wanting to talk, meeting kids. We've always, usually for that event, they bring the fire trucks down and some emergency vehicles, so they get to see a lot of different things. It's a great opportunity because we do it in a parking lot, you know.
Yeah.
Local retail space here.
There's just quickly to touch on community relations. There's another thing we do, and guys really do get involved in it. And again, going back to the 80s, you wouldn't think of it. We wrap a patrol car in pink wrap for Breast Cancer Awareness Month in October. And we have the regular Fairfield Police graphics and the badge on the side. And it brings an amazing number of men and women who want to sign that car with a felt tip marker to send a message to a deceased loved one, or send a message of hope to someone suffering with cancer. You can't believe how people in the community love the fact that the police wrap a car in pink and then go ahead and drive it on patrol or put it in an end zone during a high school game. So something that's little money, or you get it through a donation, done. People just love that stuff, and they say, wow, I got to go over and sign a cruiser.
Yeah, and the other thing, I just not to go too far, but it just reminded me when you're talking about little money. We had a canine unit. We had one canine officer, and a person who had passed away had decided that the town should have a second canine officer. Basically, created a fund to be able to acquire the dog, train the dog, feed the dog, But that outreach of having the canine folks go, the dogs go out to different events, schools, things like that.
Absolutely.
Positive, a lot of positive stuff out of it. And plus the benefit of, their work that they do.
Absolutely true. Yep.
So I've heard you talk to, you refer to police work as a profession. That's not just a job. And how is that relevant to use of force and police legitimacy?
So yeah, police work is a profession, and we really, as command staff leaders, need to bring that to the lowest level of our agencies and throughout the nation. I'm part of a program called, I'm an ambassador for a program that's a national program to talk about officer safety and wellness. And one of the things we talk about in that program, and I do it locally, is we talk about law enforcement as a profession. Now, how it matches up with use of force and legitimacy. You've heard the term, I'm on the job. I assume maybe even you guys have heard it in the movies and television shows. Hey, I'm on the job.
My niece and nephew say it all the time.
Right. It's a very big
City, it's a
city
big term
term.
in New York City.
Right. And the reason we say that is a couple of reasons. One is when we see an officer in blue, we want to be able to say we're a brother and sister, as simple as I'm looking for a restaurant, or maybe you can recommend, what bus to get on or whatever. You want to be friendly, and you want to say that I share the same things that you share. And only people on the job can understand that. So you coin the term, I'm on the job. Another part of that term is that being a police officer, you're always in a state of awareness, whether you're with your family, with your wife, or walking alone, off duty, on duty or off duty, you're always in a state of awareness. So that also defines the term, I'm on the job. I'm always on the job. 24/7, I'm on the job. So people think of work as a job, but it really is more of a profession, and we need to think of ourselves as professionals. And I'm going to give you an example why. I'm going to refer to characteristics of a professional, and they mostly line up with what we think as doctor, lawyer, accountant. And if I refer to them, I want you to think about whether they refer to law enforcement also. So the characteristics of a professional would be a full-time occupation, right? Having special knowledge, a unique set of skills, standards, a commitment to service, a code of ethics, and professional body that has mandated licensing. Now, clearly, that defines a doctor, a medical profession, that defines a lawyer, as I said, or an accountant, and that also defines a law enforcement officer, because every bit of those items in that list are what law enforcement needs to get through to be recertified every 3 years. So we truly are professionals. We need to start thinking ourselves as professionals. And as we think of ourselves as professionals, we think of ourselves as people that are here to do a job in a manner that does no harm. Now, let me say, there will always be the need for lawful use of force in law enforcement. Unfortunately, there will always be that need. It's not going to go away. But unlawful use of force is what we're trying to avoid. And if we go out every day recognizing we're professionals and recognizing we have a job to do in a professional manner, it will set the mindset more so it's not just on the job with you, me, and the guys, but we're professionals and we're going to act professionally, okay? And part of being a professional is saying to yourself, what am I doing to better myself? Constantly. We should always be in a constant state of bettering ourselves. And that includes bettering ourselves professionally, asking to go to more advanced training if it's available within our department, getting our college degrees if we don't have it already, or maybe getting an advanced degree that will help advance our career as we move up, okay? And those are also attributes of what a professional does. If you come into the Fairfield Police Department, I still hope to this day, this sign is drilled on the wall above the booking desk. And this is the desk where every officer starts their day. They get their radios, their car keys, and they head out on the road. And I was lucky enough to win this argument with the chief that I believed that these 3 words needed to be above the booking desk where every officer starts his day and ends his day. There are 3 simple phrases: be safe, be ready, and be professional. And if you kept those three things in mind, you will do the job, do it safely, and you won't commit unlawful acts. So that's really why we need to think of ourselves as being professionals.
Very good, thank you. So police work in the 70s and 80s is much different, obviously, than police work today. Can you describe the framework of a modern police officer?
So that's a very contemporary issue. What is the framework of a modern police officer, and what are we expecting from our officers? You know, when you call the police today and you have an officer show up, I think the majority of people question, what's your background and experience? You know, what have you been through other than the police academy and what this local town expects of you? So we at the command staff level have always promoted that, and I strongly believe in that there's three things that every police officer today in the 21st century should be. First is a scholar, okay? And when I say scholar, that means someone that has knowledge, understands that knowledge is power, okay? And when I mean knowledge, understanding of constitutional policing, understanding the Bill of Rights, understanding the federal laws that guide law enforcement in your jurisdiction, and the state and local codes. Now, never in here do you hear me say it needs to be memorized, because most importantly, a scholar is either self-aware of what the laws are or knows how to look it up. And there's nothing worse than going on a call or seeing an officer at a gas station and asking him a question and getting this answer. I don't know. Okay, it's disheartening, it's dismissive, and it also questions, does the whole agency not know when I ask a simple question? A scholar is able to say, you know, that's a great question. If you just give me a moment, you know, let me go to my car and let me look it up, or know how to look it up. And that is important today, that an officer, if he doesn't have an answer to the question, can facilitate an answer by looking into it, okay? We certainly hope he would have it at his fingertips, but of course, this is the mindset that we need in police work today, that you're a scholar and you have the tools and the abilities to either have that knowledge or look it up. All right. The other mindset that we're looking is that an officer needs to be a statesman. And when I say that, I always describe to officers, what does the Secretary of State do? He brings a message to other countries from the administration in a way that he gets his point across, right? And most importantly, gets his point across without making things worse. We don't want to go to another country and express the views of the administration, but make things worse. Although sometimes it happens, that's not the goal. So as a statesman, a law enforcement officer needs to be able to get his point across, needs to share what's important in the most concise way without making things worse. So what I'm talking about is we need to learn through our training the ability to persuade and move into action, okay? So everyone needs to be a statesman that's showing up on a community call or a call of a critical nature and be able to get their point across. Sometimes it takes longer, sometimes it takes more patience, and sometimes it has to be repeated more than once or twice. We understand that. But to be able to communicate, there's nothing better than to be able to say, listen, I know you're upset. The truth is, it's not going to go the way you originally thought, but this is how we're going to put it together, and this is how we're going to leave it. Okay, and that's what's important about a statesman. And lastly, the guardian mindset. The modern police officer needs to be a guardian. And when I say guardian, a keeper, a protector, a champion for those who can't defend themselves. A selfless protector. When we think of the active shooter, right? The officer that's going to go in selflessly, even if he has to give up his own life, to stop the murdering or the shooting that's going on. All right. So every officer needs to be a guardian, and a guardian that's also has the knowledge and the ability to help others. Okay. Whether it's going in and putting peace to a matter, whether it means using his ability to use limited force on the force continuum to get things to status quo, or whether it means going into an active situation and having to potentially stop the use of deadly force. What you don't hear me mention out of these three words is the fourth word that people often use in police work is warrior. I don't need my officers to be a warrior. I need my officers to be a warrior in time of crisis, but I don't need them to be a warrior in the community. And we need to change that mindset, that we don't need to have a warrior mindset every time we go on a call. Although we patrol in a very guarded fashion, and we patrol recognizing that at any time things could change at a moment's notice. But we don't want to approach every situation in that warrior mindset, guardian mindset. I'm here to protect, I'm here to serve, but when need be, I can put the pedal to the metal.
Right. Yeah, I think that's very important. And, people don't realize in a lot of situations that in a small town, rather than a big city, all kinds of things still happen, regardless of the size of the town. And we had a couple of situations where there was a standoff between an armed suspect that having the right mindset, the officers who were there were able to diffuse the situation and prevent anybody from getting hurt and take the person into custody. The
Absolutely.
person had a mental defect that was causing them to act the way they were, but they were wielding a knife, and easily someone could have made the wrong decision to use some kind of deadly force to stop the person. But there was a lot of good, if you will, modern policing. There was conversation. There was recognizing the fact that this fellow was really off, and realizing he probably didn't know what he was getting into and what he was doing. So if there was a way to be able to keep themselves safe and others around be safe, and they could still talk to this fellow, then they could dissolve and, diffuse the situation and ultimately resolve it without anybody getting hurt, which they did. But it's kind of it's great to see that. And again, people don't realize those kinds of things happen in small towns and big cities, and there's definite approaches that can work.
And I want to say to this group, and I want this group to also share with other people, that these techniques are not the carte blanche to replace use of force. There are times and places for use of force,
Right.
Especially when, you can either attempt to de-escalate and all else fails, and that other person, there's always two people in these situations. And if the
Right.
other person makes the choice to be the aggressor, then unfortunately we have to use of force at certain levels. And the other thing is, there are certain times when de-escalation there is no time. There is no time. And we know that when someone's in serious threat of serious injury or immediate death, or ourselves are in threat of immediate serious injury or death, there's plenty of documented dash cam and body cam events where there was no time to de-escalate. So these are terrific 21st century policing techniques, but I want to share with the group, they're not always a replacement for the use of force.
Correct. So the other thing that I was thinking about, we often hear the phrase confidence versus competence. How does that play into the use of force continuum?
Yeah, competence versus confidence. As a matter of fact, we often talk about the word confidence in our own home when we talk about, how confident are you about making this choice and so forth. Confidence comes up a lot. Law enforcement often refers to, and the media often refers to, the competence of the officer on that call. So I think to put this in a framework, you need to understand this is a national guideline that command staff always operate in the lower levels of law enforcement. Also think about this, but don't probably put it in a more of a frame. They put it more in how they patrol. Law enforcement operates really in two universes, 24 hours a day, 7 nights a week. 3 a.m., 3:30 a.m. I worked 5 years as a sergeant on midnights, 24 hours a day. There are really two universes. One is that we deal in high frequency, low risk events, and we also deal in low frequency, high risk events. And let me break that down for you when we talk about confidence versus competence. A high frequency, low risk event would be going on a stolen car complaint, a vandalism call, a youth complaint, kids in the street, or loud music, a medical call. They happen frequently. They have rather low risk to the officer's safety. They have rather low risk to the public safety. And calls of taking a stolen car report or minor vandalism or youths in the street have very low risk when it comes to liability to a department. And those are what we go on every day. The other universe that law enforcement is constantly circling in is that low frequency, high risk event. They happen rarely, but when they do happen, they're at very high risk posed to the officer. very high risk posed to the public, and very high risk posed to the agency with its liability. And examples being high-speed pursuit. Doesn't happen that often. Tremendous risk to the officer who's engaging in pursuit, and a tremendous threat to the public who's innocently trying to be on their way or get home. Barricaded suspect, a gentleman who's maybe mentally unstable or off his medication, or potentially took his girlfriend hostage, okay? We want this to end peacefully, but we also realize these don't happen often. We have units that are trained within our department, or we're partnered with other towns for emergency service unit. They are low frequency, but very high risk to the officer who may get harmed if he makes entry, or to the victim or the suspect himself. And of course, very high liability to the agency, okay? Another example would be an active shooter event, okay? Extremely low frequency in an officer's career, but again, high risk to the officer, absolute high risk to the immediate public in an active shooter, and of course, high risk when it comes to liability to an agency. So let's measure those high frequency and low frequency events to confidence and capability. If I lined up 100 officers from any department and went down the line and asked them, what is your level of confidence with your firearm? Knowing that they've had to qualify with it minimally, twice a year. I would say 99%, I certainly would hope 100 would say my confidence is high with their firearm. But the truth is not what they answer. The truth is, when the rubber meets the road, what is their capability in training and in the field to use that firearm successfully? That's the difference between confidence and their capability, okay? Defensive tactics, arrest and control. They can say very, very easily, I'm very confident about my handcuffing techniques. I'm very confident about my disarming techniques. But if they are not capable, when the rubber meets the road, they're going to get themselves hurt, and they're going to get their partners hurt, and they're also going to get people involved in that incident hurt. So when we talk about the level of confidence versus competence, it also rolls into the protect and serve, right? We talked about empathy, and we talked about leadership and protect and serve. We talked about self-control and patience. I could ask 100 officers lined up in the backyard of the police department, how many of you are confident in your level of patience? And all hands go up. But when really pressed, I'm sure 50% of them lack the patience they might need in certain calls. And it's irrelevant what your level of confidence is. We need to make sure our officers are trained, and they recognize the training, and they can perform the task to the level of capability that they need to get out there. And if they can, they're more apt to use less force. They're more apt to use lawful force rather than unlawful force. And they're often more accepted in the community, or moreover, myself, yourself, my parents might come away from an encounter with a police department, with a police officer that has those levels of capability, leadership, empathy, self-control, and say, that was a great contact with the police department. You know, just to tell you a quick story. My mother, as she was aging, my father called me. I was a captain at the time, and said, Mom hasn't come back from Whole Foods. It's been almost 2 hours, and I think she's lost. And I called from my home. I called the officer. I called the sergeant in the area, and he said, I'll grab the officer in the area of the supermarket, and we'll go look for your mom. And sure enough, my mom's at the front door with her carriage full of stuff, and can't find her car. And had such empathy. And he rolled up to her and said, are you looking for your car? And it's a Jetta, and they found it very quickly for her. And they asked her, because it's a lighthearted story, can you tell us how to get to your condo? And she told them, and they said, we're going to follow you home. And they followed her across town lines outside our jurisdiction and followed her home to her condo. And when I saw her days later, she commented to me, I laugh because it really is cute. She says, you know, you got to get your officers a map, because they didn't know how to get to Brewster Street. And she had no understanding that in the most kindest way, they were trying to test her sense of direction and her mindset and whether she was capable of driving. And I'll be indebted to him. It's such empathy for me calling from far away and from my mother's situation. And it left my dad satisfied, irrelevant that I'm a police officer, a retired police officer. Those are the kinds of contacts that people remember. And those are the types of community policing that we need more of.
Sure. No, yeah, I totally agree. And I remember it was a sad case. It was an untimely death of a child, 13 years old. And the officers that responded, yeah, there was blood left behind in the bathroom, and it was kind of a mess. And they took the girl to the hospital. She was pronounced dead. The officers, and I can't even say it now.
I understand.
They went back to the house and cleaned the bathroom.
Yeah, terrible.
So that the parents wouldn't have to do it.
Yeah,
and
they didn't have to. They didn't have to either. Yeah.
They just, that's just something that they did. Yep. And that was, that's over 12 or 13 years ago, but it still gets me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's a couple of cases with the death of a child, and I'll give you another example of moving forward. When things like that would happen when I came on in the late 80s, the response, first of all, if you spoke up about it, you just didn't speak up about it. And if you did, I know one officer who got the personal response from the chief or the captain at the time: suck it up. I don't want to hear this shit from you. And now the immediate response from the chief is, I want to get a focus group together, and I want to get a psychologist in there, and I want them all to go and debrief what happened about the death of that child. And yeah, like you said, it's emotional even to talk about it, but some of those guys needed to ask, where did the child go? What happened to the baby afterwards? Very important, very important. Yeah. And I don't need to be part of that because it wasn't my call, but to facilitate it made me feel that we're doing the right thing.
Sure, sure. Yeah. There's one other thing that I had a question for you on. How do you see the current legislation trends that are affecting policing in urban, suburban, and rural areas? I mean, obviously there's a big focus on trying to impact or do something different with the police from a legislative point of view. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I haven't read the bill in its entirety, but Connecticut is really moving fast, and I guess you could use the word progressive in its legislation for policing or current trends of policing. Some of the things don't worry me as much as others. What doesn't worry me as much is having a civilian review board on every agency. As I said, as we speak today, I know towns here in Fairfield, Upper Fairfield County, just outside Fairfield County, don't even have a police commission. It's the chief and the mayor. And as you know, there can be a conflict of interest or collaboration on those two without someone outside speaking up and saying, yeah, I think this needs to be looked at from a different angle. So I have no problem with civilian review boards. Another thing they're talking about is body cameras, which is not a problem, but I want to match that up against the argument of defunding police. Al, you probably know, body cameras themselves, to physically get them in the building, are an expense in and of themselves. Mm-hmm. But the storage capacity and the cloud space that you pay for runs into hundreds of thousands of dollars. So on one hand, you legislate, and it was hard enough for small agencies, Weston, yours as an example, to right. Get body cameras. We were sharing body cameras in Fairfield. We certainly didn't have enough for 106 officers. And then to sign contracts along with all of the other support services. Running a police department is essentially running any other industrial type of business. And what comes with body cameras that the public doesn't realize, all they rally around, everyone needs to have one, is what is the cost? What is the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars in maintenance, retention, and cloud storage? And the other thing about body cameras is there going to be a universal policy? Every department has a different policy. When to turn it on, when you will not be disciplined for not turning it on. I mean, the argument can be said, if it's between me and going for my firearm to protect myself or others, I'll get the firearm before I get the body cam on. But right. There may be universal policies, and I'm not against universal policies that state from the time you receive the radio call, you turn your camera on. But I will say there are very diverse policies within the state alone on when to turn that camera on. I think what the most troubling is, and I haven't read the fine print, is the dismissal of qualified immunity. Mm-hmm. Qualified immunity simply means that if you act under the color of law without wanton or reckless disregard for someone, and they come back with a claim of unjustified use of force or something malicious, that the town will defend you, and to any of those suits defend you, and will pay any findings that come against in that case. Okay. Now, again, let me preface that by, you're acting under color of law. You're acting without willful or reckless disregard for someone, as opposed to, I took a police car and decided to run it through the front of a Baskin and Robbins because I didn't like the one person that was inside. Clearly not under the color of law, and clearly wanton and reckless disregard for someone. The town is not going to back you. Okay, we get that. But I've been involved in a few intersection crashes in my career with police cars. And a major concern to me is, what about my house? What about my bank account? Okay, like any police officer in this nation would. And this is something that's enjoyed across the nation, that you have qualified immunity, that you were doing something within the color of service, and there was no wanton or reckless disregard. And with qualified immunity, I was protected in that sense that the department defended me, and the department or the city or the municipality will sustain any finding against me. With lifting that, of great concern is, what about all of these officers' finances? And again, if you unlawfully used force, or you unlawfully committed murder, you're not protected by qualified immunity anyway. So
Right.
let's move that on to the whole different shelf. But it is concerning for those officers that are in law enforcement. Is their home, could their car, could their bank account be levied by a judgment simply because the handcuffs were put on too tight, and someone not simply, but as simple as someone making a claim that they have nerve damage, which is a very common situation. You know, almost the greatest use of force lawsuits come from the use of handcuffs. That's why I always, and I don't know if it goes on today after I left, always expected officers to write that the handcuffs were double locked and fit for comfort, meaning they were adjusted for fit, I should say. They're never comfortable, not fit for comfort. That we can go back 18 months from now and look at that report that officer stated he made a declaration that he double locked them, they couldn't get tighter, and that they were adjusted for fit, versus we have no idea what happened 2 years ago, and now we have to go on the complaint that he got nerve damage. So there are concerns, and today's the day that the legislation votes on this. So it's a concern.
Right. I totally agree. It's unfortunately, I don't know that the legislators are as informed as they should be when it comes to this topic. It's, that basically your personal assets are subject to attachment if you take it away, and your defense. How do you defend yourself?
Yeah. Hire a personal attorney at my expense. I mean, it's a very treacherous road to go down. And I will say, if that is the legislation, and it does, pan out to be just that you are personally liable. And again, if it's reckless and willful and wanton, you're not protected by qualified immunity. And this is important for everyone on this call to be able to share with other people. But if you did it under color of law, and that if training officers march in, and your police academy instructors march into that courtroom and testify, that is how we trained them. They are protected by qualified immunity. Right. And I think you may see people retiring if they're near retirement age to get out of such a potential problem.
Yeah, I can see that happening as well. If there's some legislation that can impact an officer's livelihood going forward, and they perceive that to be a threat, you're absolutely right. They'll be going. They'll just retire.
Yep.
So, all right. Well, I think that pretty much sums up the presentation, and I think you did a great job, Josh. And good dialogue.
Yeah, great dialogue.
Good information about the specific topics that we were talking about, and hopefully everyone's gotten something out of it.
Yeah, I mean, if everybody just picked up one thing from this conversation, I know that there's people here with law enforcement backgrounds, and it could be just repetitive of what we know already. But I think it's important that the modern police officer have those tools in their tool belt, and don't come back with I didn't know better, or there was no other way out, or the ability to explain there was no other way out. everything that I tried to deploy wasn't working. And ultimately, I used lawful force. But I think all of these things need to be examined and examined closely when they happen, and not just take a 4-second video off of TV today. Felix?
Yeah, that's wonderful, Josh. And Al, too, some really good stories. I feel very privileged to have shared this time with the two of you and everybody else on the call. Very, very excellent content. And very proud of our chapter and all the great stuff we deliver to our members. Hopefully we can take this show and maybe replay it at some point, because it's such great content.